Pea-field. Egwene shifted herself on the bed. She remembered it as hard, but the thin mattress felt softer than what she slept on in the tent. She did not want to talk about Rand. Are you certain this fight will not cause more trouble? A feud with this Latelle could not make their traveling easier. I do not think so. Latelle's grievance against Nynaeve was that all the unattached men were no longer hers to pick and choose from. Some women do think that way, I suppose. Aludra keeps to herself, and Sarandon wouldn't have said boo to a goose until I started teaching her to stand up for herself. And Clarine is married to Petra. But Nynaeve has made it clear that she'll box the ears of any man who even thinks he can flirt with her. And she apologized to Latelle, so I hope that may settle it. She apologized? The other woman nodded.
Be right back,
her face
everyone.
as bemused as Egwene knew her own must be. I thought she would thump Luca when he told her she must. He doesn't seem to think her injunction holds to him, by the way, but she did it, after rumping about for an hour. Muttering about you, actually. She hesitated, giving Egwene a sidelong look. Did you say something to her at your last meeting? She has been different since then, and sometimes she talks to herself. Argues, really, about you, from the little I've heard. I said nothing that did not have to be said. So it was holding, whatever it was that had happened between them. Either that or Nynaeve was storing up her anger for the next time they met. She was not going to put up with the woman's temper anymore, not now that she knew she did not have to. You tell her from me that she is too old to be rolling around on the ground fighting. If she gets into another, I'll have worse to say to her. You tell her that exactly. It will be worse. Let Nynaeve chew on that until next time. Either she would be mild as a lamb, or else Egwene would just have to carry through on her threat. Nynaeve might be stronger in the power when she could channel, but here Egwene was. One way or another, she was finished with Nynaeve's tantrums. I will tell her, Elaine said. You have changed too. There seems to be something of Rand's attitude about you. It took Egwene a moment to realize what she meant, helped by that amused little smile. Don't be silly. Elaine laughed aloud and gave her another hug. Oh, Egwene, you will be Amyrlin's seat one day when I am Queen of Andor. If there is a tower then, Egwene said soberly, and Elaine's laughter faded. Elida cannot destroy the White Tower, Egwene.
Hey,
Whatever she
Netrash.
does, the tower will
They
Perhaps
broke.
she will not stay Amyrlin. Once Nynaeve
I was
remains
trying to
reigning
fix them
without
to,
harm,
straighten them
I
up a little
wager
bit.
that we find a tower in exile
And they ended up
with every
snapping
notch
right
up
in the
on
center.
I hope so.
They're held on
Egwene
by,
knew she sounded
well, not by
sad.
much,
She
because
wanted Aes Sedai to
it was like
support
almost
Rand
like
and
a
oppose Elida, but
that
that
JB
meant the
Well
White
type of
Tower
putty that
broken
was
for
supposed
sure.
to help
Maybe
fix them,
never to
but
be made whole again.
they're made so I
I
can
must
wear
get
them.
back, Elaine said. Nynaeve insists that whichever of us does not enter Teleron Riyadh remain awake.
It's just that
And with
now I
one
got
shake, she
to,
needs to drink one of her herb
because
teas
how old
and
my
sleep.
prescription is.
I do not know why she is so insistent. Whoever
You gotta
is watching
go
can do
to the
nothing
whole
to help,
doctor's appointment
and we
again,
both know enough to be perfectly safe
which
here
kind of
now.
sucks.
Her green dress flickered to Brigitta's white coat and voluminous yellow trousers for an instant, then snapped back.
Share this out real quick.
She said I wasn't to tell you this, but she thinks that Mogadin is trying to find us. Her and me. Egwene did not ask the obvious question. Clearly it was something that Brigitta had told them.
And for
Why
that,
did
I
Elaine
gotta
persist in trying to keep that secret? Because she
get the money
promised.
together to get
Elaine
that
never
appointment.
broke a promise in her life. You tell her to be careful. Small chance that Nynaeve was sitting and waiting if
Hey,
she thought one
Fire.
of the Forsaken was after her.
Oh, that's what I'm about to do. I just gotta get stuff in order somewhat.
The Forsaken are nothing to take lightly, and neither are Seanchan, even if they are supposedly just animal trainers. You tell her that. I do not suppose you would listen if I told you to be careful too. She gave Elaine a startled look. I'm always careful. You know that. Of course. The last thing Egwene saw as the other woman faded away was a very amused smile. Egwene herself did not go. If Nynaeve could not remember where that gathering of blues was, perhaps she could discover it here. It was hardly a new idea. This was not her first trip to the tower since her last meeting with Nynaeve. She put on a copy of Inila's face with flame-colored hair to her shoulders.
The
and
doctor's
an
place,
acceptance dress
my
with
doctor's
its banded
appointments
hem,
suck now because
then
I gotta
floated
actually
the
pay
image
for it
of
out of
Alad's
pocket.
ornately furnished study. It was as it had been before, though on every visit
Yeah, it
fewer of the
definitely sucks.
vine-carved stools stood in that arc in front of the wide writing table. The paintings still hung above the fireplace. Egwene strode straight to the table, pushing aside that throne-like chair with its inlaid ivory flame of Tar Valon, so she could reach the lacquered letterbox. Lifting the lid, all fighting hawks and clouds, she began scanning
So I
parchments
load
as fast as
this
she
one.
could. Even so, some melted away half-read, or changed. There was no way to tell what was important and what insignificant beforehand. Most seemed reports of failure. Still no word of where the Lord of Bashir had taken his army, and a note of frustration and worry tinging the words. That name tickled the back
Cheers
of
to
her
you
mind,
too,
but
Fire.
with no time to waste, she threw it firmly away and snatched up another sheet. No word on Rand's whereabouts either, said a cringing report filled with mere panic. That was good to know, and a trip by itself. More than a month had passed since the last news from Tanchico by any Aja's eyes and ears, and others in Tarabon had also gone silent. The writer blamed the
One
anarchy
second
there.
when I gotta go get a
Rumors
drink
that
real
someone
quick.
had taken Tanchico could not be confirmed, but the writer suggested that Rand himself was involved. Even better, if Elida was looking in the wrong place by 1,000 leagues. A confused report said that a Red Sister in Caemlyn claimed to have seen Morghese at a public audience, but various Aja's agents in Caemlyn said the Queen had been in seclusion for days. Fighting in the borderlands, possibly minor rebellions in Shinar and Arafel. The parchment was gone before she reached the reason. Pedro Nile calling in white cloaks to Amadisia, possibly to move against Altara. A good thing that Elaine and Nynaeve had only another 3 days there. The next parchment was about Elaine and Nynaeve. First, the writer advised against punishing the agent who had allowed them to escape. Elida had scratched that out in bold strokes and written, "Make an example," in the margin. And then, just when the woman began to detail the search for the pair in Amadisia, the single sheet became a fistful, a sheaf of what seemed to be builders' and masons' estimates for constructing a private residence for the Amelin seat on the tower grounds. More like a palace by the number of pages. She let the pages fall, and they vanished before they finished scattering across the tabletop. The lacquered box was closed again. She could spend the rest of her life here, she knew. There would always be more documents in the box, and they would always be changing. The more ephemeral something was in the waking world, a letter, a piece of clothing, a bowl that might be frequently moved,
Fire.
the less firm its reflection in Tel Ayramriod. She could not remain here too long. Sleep, while in the world of dreams, was not as restful as sleep disturbed. Hurrying out to the antechamber, she was about to reach for the
Let's
neat
do a
piles
dab,
of scrolls
everyone.
and parchments, some with seals, on the keeper's writing table, when the room
Yeah, and what sucks about my glasses,
before she had
or
time to even
lip
consider what
lashes,
that meant.
without them,
And Galad
I'm
stepped in,
pretty
smiling,
blind without
his
them. I can't
brocaded
hardly
blue
see
coat
anything.
fitting his shoulders perfectly, snug breeches showing the shape of his calves. She took a deep breath.
Let's
Her
do some
stomach
of the
fluttered.
Iden OG
It
again.
just was not fair for a man to have a face so beautiful. He stepped closer, dark eyes twinkling, and brushed her cheek with his fingers. "Will you walk with me in the water garden?" he said softly. "If you two wish to commingle," a brisk woman's voice said, "you will not do so here." Egwene spun wide-eyed, staring at Lyanna seated behind the table with the keeper's stole on her shoulders and a firm smile on her copper-cheeked face. The door to the Amelin's study was open, and inside Swan stood beside her simple, well-polished writing table, reading a long parchment, the striped stole of office on her shoulders. This was madness. She fled without thinking of what image she was forming, and found herself gulping for breath on the green in Emmons Field, with the thatch-roofed houses all around, and the wine spring gushing from the stone across the broad expanse of grass. Near the swift, rapidly widening stream stood her father's small inn, its lower floor stone, the overhanging upper whitewashed. The only roof lighter than Green Rivers, Bran Alvier had often said his red tiles. The large stone tower near the Wine Spring Inn, a huge spreading oak rising from its center, was far older than the inn, but some said an inn of some sort had stood there beside the Wine Spring water for more than 2,000 years. Fool. After warning Nynaeve so firmly about dreams in Tel Run-Riod, she had nearly let herself be caught in one of her own, though it was odd that it had been Galad. She did dream of him sometimes.
I hope everyone's doing good out there today.
She certainly did not love him or even like him very much, but he was beautiful, and in those dreams he had been much more what she could have wished him. It was his brother Gawain that she dreamed of more often, but that was just whatever Elaine said, he had never made any feelings known to her. It was that fool book, with all those tales of lovers. As soon as she woke in the morning, she was going to give the thing back to Avienda, and tell her that she did not think that she read it for the adventures at all. She was reluctant to leave, though. Home, Emmons Field, the last place that she had really felt safe. More than a year and a half had passed since she last saw it, yet everything seemed as she remembered. Not quite everything. On the green stood 2 tall poles with large banners, one a red eagle, the other an equally red wolf's head. Had Perrin anything to do with those? She could not imagine how. Yet he had come home, so Rand said, and she had dreamed of him with wolves more than once. Enough idle standing about. It was time to flicker. Her mother stepped out of the inn.
Had to clean my slit.
Pulled over one shoulder. Maren Alvier was a slim woman,
bigger one.
Still handsome, and the best cook in the 2 rivers. Egwene could hear her father laughing inside the common room, where he was meeting with the rest of the village council. "Are you still out here, child?" her mother said, gently chiding and amused. "You've certainly been married long enough to know you shouldn't let your husband know you mope about waiting on him." With a shake of her head, she laughed.
Hey, big movie fan.
"Here he comes."
Oh, it's not going too bad. Just chilling,
the children playing on the green.
Smoking and enjoying a book.
Bridge thrummed as Gawain galloped across and swung down from his saddle in front of her. Tall and straight in his gold-embroidered red coat, he had his sister's red-gold curls.
Let's see if I can get this out and spill it.
Blue eyes. He was not so handsome as his half-brother, of course, but her heart beat faster for him than it had for Galad. For Galad? What? And she had to press her hands to her stomach in a vain attempt to still gigantic butterflies. "Did you miss me?" he said.
Yeah, this is the...
A little. Why did I think of Galad? As if I'd just seen him a moment ago. Now and then, when there was nothing interesting to occupy
that one is...
"Did you miss me?"
This one.
For answer, he pulled her off her feet and kissed her. She was not aware of very much else until he set her back down on unsteady legs. The banners were gone.
Oh, yeah, fire.
"Here he is," her mother said, approaching with a babe wrapped in swaddling. "Here's your son. He is a fine boy. He never cries at all." Gawain laughed as he took the child, held him aloft. "He does have your eyes, Egwene. He will be a fine one with the girls one day." Egwene backed away from them, shaking her head. There had been banners, red eagle and red wolf's head. She had seen Galad in the tower. "No!" She fled, until I ran around to her own body. Awareness remained only long enough for her to wonder how she could possibly have been fool enough to let her own fancies nearly trap her, and then she was deep in her own safe dream. Gawain galloped across the wagon bridge, swinging down.
Let's see. Let's do it down
Stepping out from behind a thatch-roofed house, Mogadine wondered idly where this little village was. Not the sort of place she would expect to see banners flying. The girl had been stronger than she had thought to escape her weaving of Tel'aran'rhiod. Even Lanfear did not improve on her abilities here, whatever she claimed. Still, the girl had just been of interest because she was speaking to Elaine Trakand, who might lead her to Nynaeve Almira. The only reason to trap her had simply been to rid Tel'aran'rhiod of one who could walk it freely. It was bad enough that she must share it with Lanfear. But Nynaeve Almira, that woman she meant to make beg to be bound in her service. She would take her in the flesh, perhaps ask the Great Lord to grant her immortality, so Nynaeve could have forever to regret a part. She and Elaine were scheming with Birgitta, were they? That was another she had reason to punish. Birgitta had not even known who Mogadine was so long ago in the Age of Legends, when she foiled Mogadine's finely wrought plan to lay Luis Theron by his heels. Mogadine had known her. Only Tiadra she had been then died before she could deal with her. Death was no punishment, no end, not when it meant living on here. Nynaeve Almira, Elaine Trakand, and Birgitta. Those three would find and deal with from the shadows, so that they would not know until too late. All three, without exception. She vanished, and the banners waved on in the breeze of Tel'aran'rhiod. Chapter 26. Sally Daira. The halo of greatness, blue and gold, flickered fitfully around Loghain's head, though he rode slumped in his saddle. He didn't understand why it had appeared more often of late. He no longer even bothered to lift his eyes from the weeds in front of his black stallion to the low wooded hills rolling by all around them. The other two women rode together a little ahead, Siuan as awkward on shaggy Bella as she had ever been, Lyanna guiding her grey mare deftly, with knees more than reins. Only an unnaturally straight ribbon of ferns poking through the leaf-covered forest floor hinted that there had ever been a road here. The lacy ferns were withering, and the leaf mold rustled and crackled dryly under the horses' hooves. Thickly woven branches gave a little shelter from the noonday sun, but it was hardly cool. Sweat rolled down Min's face, despite an occasional breeze that stirred from behind them. 15 days now they had ridden west and south from Lugard, guided only by Siuan's insistence that she knew exactly where they were heading. Not that she shared her destination, of course. Siuan and Lyanna were as close-mouthed as sprung bear traps. Min was not even sure that Lyanna actually knew. 15 days while towns and villages grew fewer and farther between, until finally there were none. Day by day, Loghain's shoulders had sagged a little more, and day by day the halo appeared more often. At first he had only begun muttering that they were chasing Jack of the Mists, but Siuan had regained her leadership without opposition as he turned more and more inward. For the past 6 days he had not seemed to have the energy to care where they were going or whether they would ever get there. Siuan and Lyanna talked quietly up ahead now. All Min could hear was a barely audible murmur that might as well have been the wind in the leaves. And if she tried to ride closer, they would tell her to keep an eye on Loghain, or simply stare at her until only a stone-blind fool could keep her nose where it did not belong. They had done both often enough. From time to time, though, Lyanna twisted in her saddle to look at Loghain. Finally, Lyanna let Moonflower fall back beside his black stallion. The heat did not seem to be bothering her. Not so much as a sheen of perspiration marred her coppery face. Min reined Wildrose aside to give her room. "It won't be long now," Lyanna told him in a sultry voice. He did not look up from the weeds in front of his horse. She leaned closer, holding his arm for balance, pressing against it really. "A little while longer, darling. You will have your revenge." His eyes stayed dully on the road. "A dead man would pay more notice," Min said, and meant it. She'd been taking notes in her head of everything Liana did, and talking with her of an evening, though trying not to let on why. She would never be able to behave the way that Liana did, not unless I had enough wine in me that I couldn't sink at all. Yet a few pointers might come in handy. Maybe if you kissed him. Liana shot her a glare that could have frozen a rushing stream, but Min merely looked back. She had never had the problems with Liana that she did with Suan. Well, not as many, anyway. And the few difficulties had grown less since the other woman had left the tower. Much fewer since they had begun discussing men. How could you be intimidated by a woman who had told you in dead seriousness that there were 107 different kisses and 93 ways to touch a man's face with your hand? Liana actually seemed to believe these things. Min had not meant it as a jibe, really, the suggestion of a kiss. Liana had been cooing at him, giving him smiles that should have made steam rise from his ears since the day he had had to be hauled out of his blankets instead of rising first to chivvy the rest of them. Min did not know whether Liana actually felt something for the man, though she did find it hard to credit even the possibility, or was just trying to keep him from giving up and dying, to keep him alive for whatever Suan had planned. Liana certainly had not given up flirting with others besides him. She and Suan had apparently worked out that Suan would deal with women, Liana with men, and so it had been ever since Lugard. Her smiles and glances had twice gotten them rooms where the innkeeper had said there were none, lowered the bill at those and 3 more, and on 2 nights earned barns instead of bushes for sleeping. They had also gotten the 4 of them chased off by one farm wife with a pitchfork, and a breakfast of cold porridge thrown at them by another. But Liana had thought the incidents funny if no one else did. The last few days, however, Loghain had stopped reacting like every other man who saw her for more than 2 minutes. He had stopped reacting to her or anything else. Suan pulled Bella back stiffly, elbows out, and managing to look on the point of falling off any moment. The heat was not touching her either. "Have you viewed him today?" She hardly glanced at Loghain. "It is still the same," Min said patiently. Suan refused to understand or believe, however many times she told her, and so did Liana. It would not have mattered if she had not seen the aura since her first viewing of it in Tar Valon. Had Loghain been lying in the road, rasping his death rattle, she would have wagered all she had and more on a miraculous recovery somehow. The appearance of an Aes Sedai to heal him. Something. What she saw was always true. It always happened. She knew the same way that she had known the first time she saw Rand al'Thor that she would fall desperately, helplessly in love with him. The same way she had known she would have to share him with 2 other women. Loghain was destined for glory such as few men had dreamed of. "Don't you take that tone with me," Suan said, that blue-eyed gaze sharpening. "It is bad enough we have to spoon-feed this great hairy carp to make him eat, without you going sulky as a fisher bird in winter. I may have to put up with him, girl, but if you start giving me trouble too, you will regret it in short order. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Mara." At least you could have put a touch of sarcasm in it, she thought scornfully. You don't have to be meek as a goose. You've told Liana off to her face. The Damani woman had suggested that she practice what they had been discussing on a farrier in the last village. A tall, handsome man with strong-looking hands and a slow smile. But still, I will try not to be sulky. The worst part was that she realized she had tried to sound sincere. Suan had that effect. Men could not even begin to imagine Suan discussing how to smile at a man. Suan would look a man in the eye, tell him what to do, and expect to see it done promptly, just the way she did with everyone else. If she did anything else, as she had with Loghain, it would only be because the point did not matter enough to press. "It is not much farther, is it?" Liana said briskly. She saved the other voice for men. "I do not like the look of him, and if we have to stop for another night, well, if he helps any less than he did this morning, I don't know that we will be able to get him into his saddle again." "Not much, if those last directions I had are right." Swan sounded irritated. She had
Not
asked
really.
questions at that last village 2 days ago, not letting Min hear, of course. Loghain had showed no interest, and she did not like to be reminded of them. Min could not understand why. Swan could hardly expect Elida to be behind them. She herself hoped it was not much farther. It was hard to be sure how far south they had drifted since leaving the highway to Johanna. Most villagers had only vague notions of where their village actually was in relation to anything except the nearest towns. But when they crossed the Manetheren Drell into Altara just before Swan took them away from the well-traveled road, the grizzled old ferryman had been studying a tattered map for some reason. A map that stretched as far as the mountains of mist. Unless the estimate was off, they were going to reach another wide river in not many miles. Either the Bourne, which meant they were already into Gildan, where the prophet and his mobs were, or else the Eldar, with Amadisia and Whitecloaks on the far side. She was betting on Gildan, prophet or no prophet, and even that was a surprise if they were really close. Only a fool would think to find a gathering of Aes Sedai any nearer to Amadisia than they had to be, and Swan was anything but that. Whether they were in Gildan or Altara, Amadisia had to be not many miles distant. Gentling would have to catch up to him now, Swan muttered. If he can only hang on a few more days. Min kept her mouth shut. If the woman would not listen, there was no use in speaking. Shaking her head, Swan heeled Bella back into the lead, gripping her reins as though expecting the stout mare to bolt, and Lyanna returned to silken-voiced cajoling of Loghain. Maybe she did have feelings for him. It would be no odder a choice than Min's own. Forested hills slid on by with never a sign of change, all trees and tangles of weeds and brambles. The ferns that marked the old road ran on, arrow straight. Lyanna had said the soil was different where the road had been, as if Min should have known that. Squirrels with tufted ears sometimes chattered at them from a branch, and occasionally birds called. Which birds Min could not begin to guess. Baerlon might not be a city when compared to Caemlyn or Ilion or Tyr, but she thought of herself as a city woman. A bird was a bird, and she did not care what kind of dirt a fern grew in. Her doubts began to surface again. They had oozed up more than once after Core Springs, but back then it had been easier to push them down. Since Lugard, they had bubbled to the top more often, and she found herself considering Swan in ways she would never have dared once. Not that she had the nerve to actually confront Swan with any of them, of course. It galled her to admit that, even to herself. But maybe Swan did not know where she was going.
Crazy.
She could lie.
That'd be cool to
since
find some
Billy
old,
broke her away from the three
overgrown horse
Maybe
trails.
she was still just hoping that if she continued searching, she would find some trace of what she needed desperately to find. In a small way, a peculiar way surely, Lyanna had begun making a life for herself apart from concerns of power and the power and Rand. Not that she had abandoned them entirely, but Min did not think that there was anything else for Swan. The White Tower and the Dragon Reborn were the whole of her life, and she would hold to them even if she had to lie to herself. Woodland gave way to a large village so quickly that Min stared. Sweet gum and oak and scrubby pine, those were trees she could recognize, running to within 50 paces of thatch-roofed houses made of rounded river stones and clinging to low hills. She was willing to wager that not so long ago the forest had grown right through. A good many trees actually stood in narrow little thickets among some of the houses, crowding against the walls, and here and there unweathered stumps stood close by the front of a house. The streets still had a look of new-turned earth, not a hard-packed surface that came from generations of feet.
Cheers.
Men in their shirt sleeves were up laying new thatch atop 3 large stone cubes that had to have been inns. One actually had the remains of a faded, weathered sign dangling above the door. Yet no old thatch lay anywhere that she could see. There were far too many women out and about for the number of men in sight, and far too few children playing for the number of women. The smells of midday cooking in the air were the only normal things about the place. If the first glimpse startled Min, When she really saw what lay in front of her, she nearly fell out of her saddle. The younger women, shaking blankets from a window or hurrying on some errand, wore plain woolen dresses. But no village of any size had ever contained so many women in riding dresses of silk or fine wool, in every color and cut. Around those women and around most of the men, auras and images floated before her eyes, changing and flickering. Most people rarely had anything for her viewing, but Aes Sedai and warders seldom lacked an aura for as much as an hour. The children must have belonged to tower servants. Aes Sedai who married were few and far between, but knowing them, they would have made every effort to bring their servants, with their families, out of any place they felt that they must flee themselves. Siuan had found her gathering. There was an eerie stillness as they rode into the village. No one spoke. Aes Sedai stood without moving, watching them, and so did younger women and girls who must be accepted, or even novices. Men who a moment before had been moving with wolfish grace were frozen, one hand hidden in thatch or reaching into a doorway, doubtless where weapons were hidden. The children vanished, hurriedly herded away by the adults who had to be servants. Under all those unwinking stares, the hair on the back of Min's neck tried to stand up. Lyanna appeared uneasy, casting sidelong glances at the people they rode past, but Siuan stayed smooth-faced and calm as she led the way straight to the largest inn, the one with the unreadable sign, and scrambled down to tie Bella to the iron ring of one of the stone hitching posts that appeared to have been only recently set upright. Helping Lyanna help Logain to the ground, Siuan never offered a hand in getting him up or down. Min found her eyes darting around. Everyone staring, no one moving. "I never expected to be greeted like a long-lost daughter," she murmured to the other woman. "But why isn't anyone at least saying hello?" Before Lyanna could answer, if she meant to, Siuan said, "Well, don't stop pulling oar with the shore in reach. Bring him on in." She disappeared inside while Min and Lyanna were still guiding Logain to the door. He went easily, but when they ceased to reach him, he took only one step before stopping. The common room looked like none Min had ever seen before. The wide fireplaces were cold, of course, and had gaps where stones had fallen out. The plaster ceiling looked rotten, with holes in it as big as her head where the lathing showed. Mismatched tables of every size and shape stood about on an age-roughened floor that several girls were sweeping. Women with ageless faces sat examining parchments, giving orders to warders, a few of whom wore their color-shifting cloaks, or to other women, some of whom had to be accepted or novices. Others were too old for that, perhaps half of them graying and clearly showing their years, and there were men who were not warders too, most either darting off as though carrying messages, or else fetching parchments or cups of wine to the Aes Sedai. The bustle had a satisfying air of something being done. Auras and images danced around the room, wreathing heads, so many that she had to try to ignore them before they overwhelmed her. It was not easy, but it was a trick she had had to learn when around more than a handful of Aes Sedai at once. 4 Aes Sedai glided forward to meet the newcomers, all grace and cool serenity in their divided skirts. For Min, seeing their familiar features was like reaching home after being lost. Shiriam's tilted green eyes fixed immediately on Min's face. Rays of silver and blue flashed about her fiery hair, and a soft golden light. Min could not say what it meant. Slightly plump in her dark blue silk, at the moment she was sternness itself. "I would be happier to see you, child, if I knew how you discovered our presence here, and if I had some inkling of why you conceived the crack-brained idea of bringing him." Half a dozen warders had drifted near, hands resting on swords, eyes sharp on Logain. He did not seem to see them at all. Min gaped. Why were they asking her? "My She had no chance to say more. "It would be far better," pale-cheeked Carlinia cut in icily, "if he had died as the rumors say." It was not the ice of anger, but of cold reason. She was white Aja. Her ivory-colored dress looked as if it had had hard wear. For an instant, Min saw an image of a raven floating beside her dark hair, more a drawing of the bird than the bird itself. She thought it was a tattoo, but did not know its meaning. She concentrated on faces, tried not to see anything else. He looks nearly dead in any event, Carlinia continued, hardly taking breath. Whatever you thought, you have wasted your effort. But I, too, would like to know how you came to Salidar. Siuan and Liana stood there exchanging smugly amused glances while the onslaught went on. No one even looked at them. Mirelle, darkly beautiful in green silk embroidered on the bodice with slanting lines of gold, her face a perfect oval, usually wore a knowing smile that at times could rival Liana's new tricks. She was not smiling now as she jumped in right behind the white sister. Speak up, men. Don't stand there gaping like a dolt. She was known for her fiery temper, even among the Greens. You must tell us, Anaya added in a more kindly voice. Exasperation tinged it, though. A blunt-featured woman, and motherly despite Aes Sedai's smoothness to her face, at the moment stroking her pale gray skirts, she looked like a mother who was trying not to reach for a switch. We will find a place for you and these other 2 girls, but you must tell us how you came here. Mary herself and closed her mouth. Of course. These other 2 girls. She had grown so used to them as they were that she no longer thought of how much they had changed. She doubted whether any of these women had seen either since they were hauled off to the dungeons beneath the White Tower. Liana looked ready to laugh, and Siuan all but shook her head in disgust at the Aes Sedai. I am not the one you want to talk to, Min told Shiriam. Let these other 2 girls have those stares on them for a change. Ask Siuan or Liana. They stared at her as if she were mad until she nodded to her 2 companions. 4 sets of Aes Sedai eyes shifted to the others, but there was no instant recognition. They studied and frowned and passed glances between them. None of the warders took their eyes from Loghain or their hands from their swords. Stilling might produce this effect, Mirelle murmured finally. I have read accounts that imply as much. The faces are close in many ways, Shiriam said slowly. Someone could have found women who look much like them, but why? Siuan and Liana did not look smug any longer. We are who we are, Liana said crisply. Question us. No imposter could know what we know. Siuan did not wait for questions. My face may be changed, yet at least I know what I am doing and why. That is more than I can say for you, I'll wager. Min groaned at her steely tone, but Mirelle nodded, saying, That is Siuan Sanche's voice. It is she. Voices can be trained, Carlinia said, still coolly calm. But how far can memories be taught? Anaya frowned sternly. Siuan, if that is who you are, on your 22nd name day we had an argument, you and I. Where did it occur, and what was the outcome? Siuan smiled confidently at the motherly woman. During your lecture to the Accepted on why so many of the nations carved out of Artur Hawkwing's empire after his death failed to survive, I still disagree with you on some points, by the way. The outcome was that I spent 2 months working 3 hours a day in the kitchens, in the hope that the heat will overpower and diminish your ardor, I think you said. If she had thought that one answer would be sufficient, she was wrong. Anaya had more questions for both women, and so did Carlinia and Shiriam, who apparently had been novices and accepted with the pair. They were all about the sort of thing no imposter would be able to learn, scrapes gotten into, pranks successful and not, opinions generally held of various Aes Sedai teachers. Min could not believe that the women who would become the Amerlin's seat and the keeper of the chronicles could have dropped themselves into the soup so often, but she had the impression that this was only the tip of a berry, and it appeared that Shiriam herself might not have been far behind them. Mirelle, the youngest by years, confined herself to a few comments until Siuan said something about a trout put into Soroya Sedai's bath and a novice taught to mind her ways for half a year. Not that Siuan
you got
had
kitchen
much
duty?
room to talk of anyone minding her
No,
ways.
when that chick off, I had to go get a drink.
Shifts with itchweed when she was a novice, sneaking out of the tower to go fishing. Even Accepted needed permission to leave the tower grounds except during certain hours. Swan and Liana together had even chilled a bucket of water to near freezing and set it so it would douse an Aes Sedai who had had them switched, unfairly as they saw it. From the glint in Anaya's eyes, it was a good thing for them that they hadn't found out that time. From what Min knew of novice training, and Accepted for that matter, these women were lucky that they'd been allowed to remain long enough to become Aes Sedai, much less that they still had whole hides. "I am satisfied," the motherly woman said at last, glancing at the others. Mirel nodded after Shiriam did, but Carlinia said, "There is still the question of what to do with her." She stared right at Swan, unblinking, and the others suddenly seemed uneasy. Mirel pursed her lips, and Anaya studied the floor. Smoothing her dress, Shiriam seemed to avoid looking at the newspaper at all. "You know everything I knew before," Liana told them, her sudden frown at the last word. "We can be of use." Swan was dark-faced. Liana had seemed amused, if anything, at her recounted girlhood misdeeds and penalties, but Swan did not like the telling one bit. Yet, in contrast to her near glare, her voice was only a little tight. "You wanted to know how we found you. I made contact with one of my agents who also works for the Blue, and she told me of Salidera." Min did not understand that about Salidera at all. Who was she? But Shiriam and the others nodded at one another. Swan had done something other than tell them how, Min realized. She had let them know that she still had access to the eyes and ears who had served her as Amaran. "You sit over there, Min," Shiriam told Min, pointing to the one table not in use in a corner. "Or are you still Mindrada? And keep the bing." She and the other three gathered Swan and Liana,
Nice and clean now.
back in the common room. Two more women in riding dresses joined them before they vanished through a new-made door.
Just gotta let it cool down and I'll do another dab.
Sighing, Min took Loghain's arm and led him to the table, sat him down on a rough bench, and took a shaky ladder-backed chair herself.
Yeah, they get that punishment a lot
themselves nearby, leaning against the wall.
as they're learning and going to the White Tower. They get sent to
and they could have their swords out
either scrub pots or help in the kitchen part.
So there were to be no open arms in welcome, even with Swan and Liana recognized. Well, what did she expect? Swan and Liana had been the two most powerful women in the White Tower. Now they were not even Aes Sedai. The others very likely did not know how to behave toward them. And appearing with a gentled false dragon, Swan had better not be lying or wishing about having a plan for him. Min did not think Shiriam and the others would be as patient as Loghain had been.
Yeah, pretty much.
And Shiriam, at least, had recognized her. She stood again,
sounds like some type of military punishment
into the street.
that you
Their
see on
horses were still
TV.
at the hitching posts, but one of those warders who were not watching would have her before she had Wild Rose's reins untied. This last time in the tower, Swan had gone to great lengths to disguise her. To no end, it seemed. She did not think any of them knew about her viewings, though. Swan and Liana had held that tightly to themselves. Min would be just as glad if it remained that way. If these Aes Sedai learned of it, they would entangle her just as Swan had, and she would never reach Rand. She was not going to be able to show off what she had learned from Liana if they kept her on a leash here. Helping Swan find this gathering, helping bring Aes Sedai to Rand's aid, was all very well and important, but she still had a personal goal. Making a man who had never looked at her twice fall in love with her before he went mad. Maybe she was as mad as he was fated to be. "Then we'll make a matched pair," she muttered to herself.
There you go. They're nice and clean now.
A green-eyed girl who had to be a novice stopped at her table. "Would you like something to eat or drink? There is venison stew and wild pears. There might be some cheese, too." She put so much effort into not looking at Loghain that she might as well have stared pop-eyed. "Pears and cheese sound very good," Min told her. The last 2 days had been hungry. Swan had managed to catch some fish in a stream, but Loghain had done all the hunting when they had not eaten at an inn or a farm. Dried beans did not make a meal, in her opinion. And some wine if you have it. But first, I would like some information. Where are we, if it isn't a secret here, too? This village is called Salidar? In Altara. The Eldar is about a mile to the west. Amadisia is on the other side. The girl put on a poor imitation of Aes Sedai mystery. Where better to hide Aes Sedai than where they would never be looked for? We should not have to hide, a dark, curly-haired young woman snapped, stopping. Min recognized her, an accepted named Pheolane. She would have expected her to be in the tower still. Pheolane had never liked anyone or anything as far as Min knew, and had often spoken of choosing the Red Aja when she was raised. A perfect follower for Elida.
Damn.
Why did you come here?
I definitely
With
gotta
him? Why did she come?
clean it.
There was no doubt
I
in
don't know if
Min's
you can
mind
see
who
it
she
through
meant.
here, but
It is her fault we have to hide. I did not believe she helped Mazrim time to escape, but if she appears here with him, maybe she did. That will be enough, Pheolane. A slender woman with black hair spilling
where you
down
can
her
I
back
can
to her
see
waist, told the
there's a
round
little bit of
fist
like
accepted. Min
reclaim,
thought she knew the woman in the
like
dark
in
golden
the
silk
perk
riding
part
dress.
and then other
A
perk
decent,
part. There's a little bit
a
of
yellow,
reclaim
she
too.
believed. Go about your
Definitely
duties,
need a
Edisina said. And if you
soak
mean
that
to
here
bring
before
food,
long.
Tabaya, do it. Edisina did not watch Pheolane's sullen curtsy. The novice gave a beckoning right away, but put a hand on Loghain's head instead. Eyes on the table he did not seem to notice. To Min's eyes, a silvery collar suddenly appeared, snug around the woman's neck, and as suddenly seemed to shatter. Min shivered. She did not like viewings connected to the Shan-Chan. At least Edisina would escape somehow. Even if Min had been willing to expose herself, there was no point in warning the woman. It would not change anything. It is the
I need to get
gentleman,
another
the
one, so when
Aes
this
Sedai
one's
said after a
clean, I
moment.
still have something I
He
can
has
smoke
given
with.
up on wanting to live, I suppose. There is nothing I can do for him. Not that I am sure I should, if I could. The look she gave Min before leaving was far from friendly. An elegant, statuesque woman in russet silk paused a few feet away, coolly examining Min and Loghain with expression. Kirunda was a green and regal in her. She was the sister of the king of Arabia, but she had been friendly to Min in the tower. Min smiled, but those large
Don't get me
dark
wrong, I
eyes
gotta
swept over her without recognition.
between me and my
Kirunda glided out of the inn.
most hated.
4 warders, disparate men, but all with that
We
Denizen way of moving, suddenly healing her. Waiting for her food, Min hoped that Siuan and Liana were finding a warmer reception.
About 5 or 6 dab rigs.
Chapter 27. The practice of
But I'd rather do my dabs out of this because they'll make
Siuan told the 6 women
they'll make my
facing
dabs
her in
last
6
longer.
different sorts of chair. The room itself was a muddle.
Versus
2 large kitchen
doing
tables against
dabs.
the walls held pens and ink jars and sand bottles in neat arrays. Mismatched lamps, some glazed pottery and some
should I say
gilded,
doing dabs out of dab
candles
rig?
in every thickness and length stood ready to provide light
Because
at
doing dabs
nightfall.
out of dab rig, you
A
tend to
scrap of Ileana's silk
go through your
cotton,
wax a little
rich
bit
in
quicker.
blues and reds and gold, lay on a floor of rough weathered
This
planks.
is how much you put in for a
She
dab.
and Ileana had been seated across a piece of carpet from the others in such a way that they were the focus of every eye. Open casement windows with panes cracked were replaced by old silk, let a breath of air stir in, but not enough to cut the heat. Swan told herself that she did not envy these women their ability to channel. She was past that, surely. But she did envy the way none of them perspired. Her own face was quite damp. All that activity out there is playing show. You might be fooling each other and maybe even the Gaidin, though I'd not count on that were I you, but you can't fool me. She wished that Morvrin and Bayanin had not been added to the group. Morvrin was skeptical of everything despite her placid, sometimes vaguely absent look, a stout brown with gray-streaked hair who demanded 6 pieces of evidence before she would believe fish had scales, and Bayanin, a pretty gray with dark honey hair and blue-gray eyes so big they constantly made her appear slightly startled. Bayanin made Morvrin seem gullible. Elida has the tower in her fist, and you know she will mishandle Rand al'Thor, Swan said scornfully. It will be pure luck if she doesn't panic and have him gentled before Tarmangayden. You know that, whatever you feel about a man channeling, Reds feel 10 times more. The White Tower is at its weakest when it should be at its strongest, in the hands of a fool when it must have skilled command. She wrinkled her nose, staring them in the eye one by one. And you sit here, drifting with your sails down. Or can you convince me that you are doing more than twiddling your thumbs and blowing bubbles? Do you agree with Swan, Liana? Anaya asked mildly. Swan had never been able to understand why Moiraine liked the woman. Trying to get her to do anything she did not want to was like hitting a sack of feathers. She did not stand up to you or argue. She just silently refused to move. Even the way she sat, with her hands folded, looked more like a woman waiting to knead dough than an Aes Sedai. In part I do, Liana replied. Swan gave her a sharp look that she ignored. About Elaida, certainly. Elaida will misuse Rand al'Thor, as surely as she is misusing the tower. For the rest, I know that you have worked hard to gather as many sisters here as you have, and I expect that you are working just as hard to do something about Elaida. Swan sniffed loudly. On her way through the common room, she had snatched glimpses of some of those parchments being examined so assiduously. Lists of provisions, allotments of timber for rebuilding, assignments for wood cutting and repairing houses and cleaning out wells. Nothing more. Nothing that looked the least like a report on Elaida's activities. They were planning to winter here. All it took was one blue being captured after she had learned of Sully Dar, one woman being put to the question. She would not hold back much if Alviarin had charge of it, and Elaida would know exactly where to net them, while they worried about planting vegetable gardens and having enough firewood cut before the first freeze. Then that is out of the way, Carlinia said coolly. You do not seem to understand that you are not Amyrlin and Keeper any longer. You are not even Aes Sedai. Some had the grace to look embarrassed. Not Morvrin or Baonin, but the others. No Aes Sedai liked to speak of Stilling or be reminded of it. They would think it especially harsh in front of the two of them. I do not say this to be cruel. We do not believe the charges against you, despite your traveling companion, or we would not be here. But you cannot assume your old places among us, and that is a simple fact. Swan remembered Carlinia well as novice and accepted. Once a month, she had committed some minor offense, a small thing that earned her an extra hour or two of chores. Exactly one each month. She had not wanted the others to think her a prig. Those had been her only offenses. She never broke another rule or put a foot wrong. It would not have been logical. Yet she had never understood why the other girls had considered her an Aes Sedai pet anyway. A great deal of logic and not much common sense. That was Carlinia. While what was done to you was the letter of the law narrowly, Shiriam said gently, we agree that it was malignantly unjust, an extreme distortion of the law's spirit. The chair back behind her fire-red head was incongruously carved by what seemed to be a mass of snakes. Whatever rumor might say, most of the charges laid against you were so thin that they should have been laughed away. Not the charge that she knew of Rand al'Thor and conspired to hide him from the tower, Carlinia broke in sharply. Shiriam nodded. But be that as it may, even that was not sufficient for the penalty given. Nor should you have been tried in secret without even a chance to defend yourself. Never fear that we will turn our backs on you. We will see that you both are cared for. I thank you, Liana said, her voice soft and almost trembling. Swan grimaced at them. You haven't even asked me about the eyes and ears I can use. She had liked Shiriam when they were students together, though years of tradition had opened water between them. Cared for, indeed. Is Ealdine here? Anaya started to shake her head before stopping herself. I suspected not, or you would know more of what is going on. You've left them sending their reports to the tower. Slow realization dawned on their faces. They had not known Ealdine's office. I headed the Blue Ajah's net of eyes and ears before I was raised Amyrlin. More surprise. With a little effort, every blue agent and those who served me as Amerlin too can be sending her reports to you by routes that would keep her ignorant of their final destination. It would take considerably more than little work, but she had already sketched most of it out in her head, and there was no need for them to know more at the moment. And they can continue sending reports to the tower, reports containing what you want Elida to believe. She'd almost said we. She had to watch her tongue. They did not like it, of course. The women who tended the networks might be unknown to all but a few, but they were every one Aes Sedai. They'd always been Aes Sedai. But that was her only lever with which to pry her way into the circles where decisions were made. Otherwise, they would likely stuff her and Lyanna into a cottage with a servant to look after them, and maybe a rare visit to Aes Sedai who wanted to examine women who had been stilled until they died. They would die soon in those circumstances. They might even marry us off. Some thought that a husband and children could occupy a woman enough to replace the one
cast
in her
hit.
life. More than one woman, stilled by drawing too much of Saidar to herself, or in testing Terangreal for their uses, found herself being matched with potential husbands. Since those who did marry always put as much distance as possible between themselves and the tower and its memories, the theory remained unproven. It should not be difficult, Lyanna said diffidently, to put myself in touch with my eyes and ears before I was killed. More importantly, as keeper of the temple, I had agents in Tar Valon itself. Startlement widened a few eyes, though Carlinia's narrowed. Lyanna blinked, shifted uneasily, smiled weakly. I always thought it foolish that we paid more attention to the mood of Ebudar or Bandar Eben than to the mood of our own city. They had to see the value of eyes and ears in Tar Valon. Siuan. Leaning forward in her thick-armed chair, Morvrin said the name firmly, as though to emphasize that she had not said mother. That round face looked more stubborn than placid now, her stoutness a threatening mass. When Siuan had been a novice, Morvrin hadn't noticed the mischief of the girls around her, but when she did, she had taken care of matters herself, in ways that had everyone sitting straight and walking small for days. Why should we allow you to do as you want? You have been stilled, woman. Whatever you were, you are no longer Aes Sedai. If we want these agents' names, you will both give them to us. There was a flat certainty to that last. They would give them, one way or another. They would, if these women wanted them enough. Lyanna shivered visibly, but Siuan's chair creaked as she stiffened her back. I know that I am not Amerlin anymore. Do you think I don't know I was stilled? My face is changed, but not what is inside. Everything I ever knew is still in my head. Use it. For the love of the light, use me. She took a deep breath to calm herself. Burn me if I let them shove me aside to rot. And Myrelle spoke into the pause. A young woman's temper, to go with a young woman's fate. Smiling, she sat on the edge of a stiff-backed armchair that could have stood in front of a farmer's fireplace if the farmer had not cared that the varnish was flaking. The smile was not her usual one, though, languid and knowing at the same time, and her dark eyes, nearly as large as bayonets, were full of sympathy. I'm sure that no one wants you to feel useless, Siuan, and I'm sure that we all want to employ your knowledge fully. What you know will be of great use to us. Siuan did not want her sympathy. You seem to have forgotten Loghain and why I dragged him all the way here from Tar Valon. She had not meant to bring this up herself, but she was going to let it lie. My crack-brained idea? Very well, Siuan, Sheriam said. Why? Because the first step to pulling Elida down is for Loghain to reveal to the tower, to the world if need be, that the Red Ajah set him up as a false dragon so that he could be pulled down. She certainly had their attention now. He was found by Reds in Ghealdan at least a year before he proclaimed himself, but instead of bringing him to Tar Valon to be gentled, they planted the idea in his head of claiming to be the Dragon Reborn. You are certain of this? Beonin asked quietly in a heavy Tarraboner accent. She sat very still in her tall, cane-bottomed chair, watching carefully. He does not know who Liana and I are. He talked with us sometimes on the journey here, late at night when Min was sleeping and he could not rest. He said nothing before because he thinks the entire tower was behind it, but he knows that it was Red Sisters who shielded him and talked to him of the Dragon Reborn. Why? Morvrin demanded, and Shiriam nodded. Yes, why? Any of us would go out of our way to see a man like that gentled, but the Red Ajah lives for nothing else. Why would they create a false dragon? Loghain did not know, she told them. Perhaps they think they gain more by capturing a false dragon than gentling a poor fool who might terrorize one village. Perhaps they have some reason to want more turmoil. We do not suggest they've had anything to do with Mazrim Time or any of the others, Liana added quickly. Elida will no doubt be able to tell you what you want to know. Siuan watched them mull it over in silence. They never considered the possibility that she was lying. An advantage to having been stilled. It did not seem to occur to them that being stilled might have broken all ties to the three oaths. Some Aes Sedai studied stilled women, true, but gingerly and reluctantly. No one wanted to be reminded of what might happen to herself. For Loghain, Siuan had no worry, as long as Min continued to see whatever it was that she saw. He would live long enough to reveal what Siuan wanted him to, once she had talked to him. She had not dared risk his deciding to go his own way, which he might well have done had she told him before. But it was his one chance for revenge now, against those who had gentled him, surrounded by Aes Sedai again as he was. Revenge only against the Red Ajah, true, but he would have to settle for that. A fish in the boat was worth a school in the water. She glanced at Liana, who smiled the faintest possible smile. That was good. Liana had disliked being kept in the dark about her plan for the man until this morning, but Siuan had lived too long wrapped in secrecy to be easy revealing more than she had to, even to a friend. She thought that the idea of Red Ajah involvement with other false dragons had been neatly planted. Reds had been the leaders in overthrowing her. There might not be a Red Ajah once this was done with. This changes a great deal, Shiriam said after a time. We cannot possibly follow an Amyrlin who would do such a thing. Follow her, Siuan exclaimed, for the first time truly startled. You are actually considering going back to kiss Elida's ring, knowing what she has done and will do? Liana quivered in her seat as if she wanted to say a few choice words herself, but they had agreed that Siuan was to be the one to lose her temper. Shiriam looked a trifle embarrassed, and spots of color floated in Mirel's olive cheeks, but the others took it as calmly as sunshine. The tower must be strong, Carlinia said in a voice as hard as winter stone. The dragon has been reborn. The last battle is coming, and the tower must be whole. Anaya nodded. We understand your reasons for disliking Elida, even hating her. We do understand, but we must think of the tower and the world. I confess I do not like Elida myself, but then I have never liked Siuan either. It is not necessary to like the Amyrlin seat. There is no need to glare so, Siuan. You have had a file for a tongue since you were a novice, and it has only roughened with the years. And as Amyrlin, you pushed sisters where you wanted and only seldom explained why. The two do not make a likable combination. I will try to smooth my tongue, Siuan said dryly. Did the woman expect the Amyrlin seat to treat every sister like a childhood friend? But I hope what I've told you changes your desire to kneel at Elida's feet. If that is your smoother tongue, Mirel said idly, I may have to smooth it myself if we do allow you to run the eyes and ears for us. We cannot go back to the tower now, of course, Shiriam said. Not knowing this. Not until we are in a position to see Elida deposed. Whatever she has done, the Reds, they will continue to support her. Beonin stated it as fact, not objection. It was no secret that the Reds resented the fact that there had not been an Amerlin from their Adja since Bonwyn. Morvrin nodded heavily. Others will as well. Those who have thrown themselves too much behind Elida to believe they have any other choice. Those who will support authority, however vile. And some who will believe we are dividing the tower when it must be whole at any cost. All but the Red Sisters can be approached, Baonin said judiciously. Negotiated with. Mediation and negotiation were her Adja's reason for existence. It seems we will have a use for your agents, Swan. Shiriam looked around at the others. Unless anyone still thinks we should take them away from her. Morvrin was the last to shake her head, but she did it, finally, after a long study that made Swan feel stripped, weighed, and measured. She could not stop a sigh of relief. Not a short life drying up in a cottage, but a life of purpose. It might still be a short life. No one knew how long a stilled woman could live, given something to replace the one power in her life. But with purpose, it would be long enough. So Mirelle was going to smooth her tongue for her, was she? I'll show that fox-eyed green. I will hold my tongue and be glad she isn't doing more than look at me is what I'll do. I knew how this would go. Burn me, but I did. Thank you, Aes Sedai, she said in the meekest tone she could find. To call them that pained her. It was another break, another reminder of what she was not any longer. I will try to give good service. Mirelle did not have to nod in such a satisfied way. Swan ignored a small voice that said she would have done as much or more in Mirelle's place. If I may suggest, Lyanna said, it is not enough to wait until you have enough support in the hall of the tower to depose Elida. Swan put on an interested look, as though hearing this for the first time. Elida sits in Tar Valon, in the White Tower, and to the world she is Amelin. At the moment you are only a flock of dissidents. She can call you rebels and agitators, and coming from the Amerlin seat, the world will believe it. We can hardly stop her being Amelin before she is deposed, Carlinia said, shifting on her chair in icy contempt. Had she been wearing her white fringed shawl, she would have slipped around her. You can give the word to true Amelin. Lyanna spoke not to the sister, but to all of them, eyeing each in turn, sure of what she was saying, and at the same time offering a suggestion that she merely hoped they would take.
Excuse me.
It had been Swan who pointed out that the techniques she employed on men could be adapted for women. I saw Aes Sedai from every Adja save the Red in the common room and in the streets. Have them elect a hall of the tower here, and let that hall select a hall. Then you can present yourself to the world as the true White Tower in exile, and Elida as the with Loghain's revelations added in, can you doubt who the nations will accept as the real Amerlin seat? The idea took hold. Swan could see them turn over in their minds. What the others thought, only Shiriam voiced a word against. It will mean that the tower truly is broken, the green-eyed woman said sadly. It already is broken, Swan told her tartly, and instantly wished she had not, when they all looked at her. This was supposed to be purely Lyanna's notion. She herself had a reputation as a deft manipulator, and they could well be suspicious of anything she proposed.
Yeah,
That was why she had begun by scathing them. They would not have believed her if she had begun with mild words. She would come at them as if she still thought herself Amelin, and let them put her in her place. By comparison, Lyanna would seem more cooperative, only offering the little she could, and they would be more likely to listen to her. Doing her own part had not been difficult, until it came to cooking. Then she had wanted to hang them all in the sun to dry, sitting here, doing nothing. You didn't have to worry about them being suspicious. They think you are a broken reed. If everything went properly, they would not learn differently. A useful reed, but a weak one, not to be thought of twice. It was a painful accommodation to make, But Duranda Tharn had shown her the necessity in Lugard. They would accept her only on their terms, and she would have to make the best of it. I wish I'd thought of this myself, she went on. Now that I hear it, Liana's idea gives you a way to build the tower again without having to tear it down completely first. I still cannot like it, Shiriam's voice firmed. But what must be, must be. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, and the light willing it will weave Elida out of the stole. We will need to negotiate with those sisters who remain in the tower, Baonin mused, only half to herself. The Amarlin we choose, she must be a skilled negotiator, yes? Clear thinking will be needed, Carlinia put in. The new Amarlin must be a woman of cool reason and logic. Morvrin's snort was loud enough to make everyone jump in their chairs. Shiriam is the highest among us, and she has kept us together when we'd have been running in 10 different directions. Shiriam shook her head vigorously, but Mirel gave her no chance to speak. Shiriam is an excellent choice. I can promise every green sister here behind her I know. Anaya opened her mouth, agreement plain on her face. It was time to put a stop to this before it got out of hand. If I may suggest, Swan thought she managed diffidence much better than she had meekness. It was a strain, but she thought she had better learn to maintain it. Mirel isn't the only one who will try to stuff me in the bilges if they think I've overstepped my place, whatever it is. Only, they would not try, they would do. Aes Sedai required respect from those who were not. It seems to me that whoever you choose should be someone who was not in the tower when I was deposed. Would it not be best if the woman who unites the tower again was one whom no one could accuse of choosing a side on that day? If she had to keep this up, she was going to burst a seam in her head. Someone very strong in the power, Liana added. The stronger she is, the more she can stand for all that the tower means, or will again, once Elida is gone. Swan could have kicked her. That thought was supposed to wait a full day, to be tossed in once they actually began considering names. Between them, she and Liana knew enough of every sister to find some weakness, some doubt to be dangled subtly as to her fitness for stole and staff. She would rather wade naked through a school of silver pike than have these women realize that she was trying to manipulate them. A sister who was out of the tower, Shiriam said, nodding. That makes excellent sense, Swan. Very good. How easily they slipped into patting her on the head. Morvrin pursed her lips. It will not be easy finding whoever we choose. Strength narrows the possibilities. Anaya looked around at the others. It will not only make her a better symbol to the other sisters at least, but strength in the power often goes with strength of will, and whoever we choose will surely need that. Carlinia and Baonin were the last to join in agreement. Swan kept her face smooth, her smile on the inside. The breaking of the tower had changed many things, many ways of thinking besides her own. These women had led the sisters gathered here, and now they were discussing who should be presented to their new Hall of the Tower, as if that should not be the Hall's choice. It would not be difficult to bring them around, ever so gently, to the belief that the new Amarlin should be one who could be guided by them. And, unknowing, they and the Amarlin she chose for her replacement would be guided by herself. She and Moiraine had worked too long to find Randall Thor and prepare him, given too much of their lives, for her to risk the rest of it being bungled by someone else. If I may make another suggestion, diffidence was simply not in her nature. She was going to have to find something else. She waited, trying not to grit her teeth for Shiriam to nod before going on. Elida will be attempting to discover where Randall Thor is. The farther south I came, the more rumors I heard that he has left Tyr. I think that he has, and I know that I have reasoned out where he went. There was no need for her to say that they had to find him before Tar Valon did. They all understood. Not only would Elida mishandle him, certainly, but should she put her hands on him, display him shielded and in her control, any hope of toppling her would be gone. Rulers knew the prophecies if their people usually did not. They would forgive her a dozen false dragons out of necessity. Where? Morvrin barked, a hair ahead of Shiriam, Anaya, and Mirel all together. The Aiel Waste. There was a moment of silence before Carlinia said, "That is ridiculous." Swan bit back an angry reply and smiled what she hoped was an apologetic smile. "Perhaps, but I read something of the Aiel when I was accepted. Gitara Moroso thought that some of the Aiel wise ones might be able to channel. Gitara had been keeper then. One of the books she had me read, an old thing from the dustiest corner of the library, claimed that the Aiel call themselves the people of the dragon. I did not remember it until I tried puzzling out where Rand could have vanished to. The prophecies say, the stone of Tyr shall never fall till the people of the dragon come. There were Aiel in the taking of the stone. That every rumor and tale agrees on. Morvrin's eyes suddenly seemed to look elsewhere. I remember speculation about the wise ones when I was newly raised to the shawl. It would be fascinating if true, but Aiel are little more welcoming to Aes Sedai than to anyone else who enters the waste, and their wise ones apparently have some law or custom against speaking to strangers, so I understand, which makes it extremely hard to come close enough to one to feel if she... Suddenly she gave herself a shake, staring at Swan and Lyanna as though her wandering had been their fault. A thin straw to weave a basket. Something you remember from a book likely written by someone who never saw an Aiel. A very thin straw, Carlinia said. But worth sending someone to the waste? It took effort to make that a question instead of a demand. Swan thought she might sweat down to nothing if she could not find another way. She still had enough control of herself to ignore the heat, but not while trying to drag these women along without letting them notice her fisting their hair. I do not think the Aiel would try to harm an Aes Sedai, not if she was quick enough to show that she was Aes Sedai. Swan did not think they would. It had to be risked. And if he is in the way, the Aiel will know of it. Remember those Aiel at the stone? Perhaps, Baonin said slowly. The waste is large. How many would we need to send? If the Dragon Reborn is in the waste, Anaya said, the first Aiel met will not. Events follow this roundabout by all accounts. He could not slip into the ocean without making a splash heard in every corner of the world. Mirel smiled. Green. None of the rest of you will bond more than one warder, and 2 or 3 Gaidin might be very useful in the waste until the Aiel know her for Aes Sedai. I have always wanted to see an Aiel. She had been a novice during the Aiel War and not allowed out of the tower. Not that I had taken part beyond healing, of course. The 3 oaths had bound them unless Tar Valon, or maybe even the tower itself, were attacked, and that war had never crossed the rivers. Not you, Shiriam told her, or any other member of this council. You agreed to see this through, Mirel, when you agreed to sit with us, and that does not include gallivanting off because you are bored. I fear there will be more excitement than any of us could wish before we finish. She would have made an excellent Amyrlin in other circumstances. In these, she was simply too strong and sure of herself. But Green's, yes, I think so. 2? Her green eyes swept along the others. To be certain? Kiruna Nachiman? Anaya offered, and Baonin added, Bera Harkin? The others nodded, except for Mirel, who shifted her shoulders irritably. Aes Sedai did not pout, but she came close. Swan took her second relieved breath. She was certain her reasoning was correct. He had vanished to somewhere, and if he was anywhere between the spine of the world and the Areth Ocean, rumors would have been flying. And wherever he was, Moiraine would be there with a hand on his collar. Kiruna and Bera would surely be willing to carry a letter to Moiraine, and they had 7 warders between them to keep the Aiel from killing them. We do not want to tire you and Lyanna, Shiriam went on. I will ask one of the Yellow Sisters to look at both of you. Perhaps she can do something to help, to ease you in some way. I will have rooms found for you where you can rest. If you are to be our mistress of eyes and ears, Mirel added solicitously, you must maintain your strength. I am not so frail as you seem to think, Swan protested. If I were, could I have followed you nearly 2,000 miles? Whatever weakness I had after being stilled is gone, believe me. The truth was that she had found a center of power again, and she did not want to leave it, but she could hardly say that. All those concerned eyes on her and Lyanna. Well, not Carlinya's particularly, but the rest. Light! They're going to have a novice tuck us into bed for a nap. A knock at the door was followed immediately by Arinvar, Shiriam's warder. Cairhienin he was not tall and slender besides, but in spite of grey at his temples he was hard of face, and he moved like a stalking leopard. There are 20-odd riders to the east, he said without preamble. Not white cloaks, Carlinya said, or I presume you would have reported it. Shiriam gave her a look. Many sisters could be prickly when it came to another stepping between them and their guidine. We cannot allow them to get away and perhaps carry word of our presence. Can they be captured, Arinvar? I would prefer that to killing them. Either may be difficult, he replied. Machan says they are armed and have the look of veterans, worth 10 times their number of younger men. Morvrin made a vexed sound. We must do one or the other. Forgive me, Shiriam. Arinvar, can the Gaideen sneak some of the more agile sisters close enough to weave air around them? He shook his head fractionally. Machan says they may have seen some of the warders keeping watch. They would certainly see if we tried to bring more than 1 or 2 of them. They are still coming, though. Swan and Lyanna were not the only ones to exchange startled glances. Few men saw a warder who did not want to be seen, even without the Gaideen cloak. Then you must do as you think best, Shiriam said. Capture them if possible, but none must escape to betray us. Before Arinvar could complete his bow, hand to sword hilt, another man was beside him, a dark bear of a man, tall and wide, with hair to his shoulders and a short beard that left his upper lip bare. That flowing warder movement seemed odd on him. He winked at Mirel, his eyes Sedai, even as he said in a thick Illianer accent, Most of the riders do be stopped, but one does come on by himself. If my aged mother did say different, I would still name him Gareth Bryn from the glimpse I did get. Swan stared at him. Her hands and feet suddenly felt cold. Strong rumor said that Mirel had actually married her and her other 2 warders, in defiance of convention and law no one had ever heard of. It was the sort of incongruous thought that drifted through a stunned mind, and right then she felt as if a mast had fallen on her head. Bryn? Here? It's impossible. It is mad. Surely the man could not have followed them all this way, for, oh yes, he could and would. That one would. As they journeyed, she had told herself that it was only sensible caution to leave no trace behind, that Elida was not dead, whatever the rumors, and should not stop hunting until they were found and put down. Swan had been irritated at having to ask directions finally, yet the thought that had snapped at her like a shark had not been that Elida might somehow find a blacksmith in one small Altaran village, but that the blacksmith would be like a painted sign for Bryn. Told yourself it was foolish, didn't you? And now here he is. She well remembered her confrontation with him, and she'd had to bend him to her will on that matter of Miranda. It had been like bending a thick iron bar, or some huge spring that would leap back if she let up for an instant. She had had to bring all of her force to bear, had had to humiliate him publicly, in order to make certain he would remain bent for as long as she needed. He could hardly go against what he had agreed to on his knees, with 50 nobles watching. Morgaze had been difficult enough
Excuse me.
herself, and Swan had not been willing to risk Bryn giving Morgaze an excuse to go against her instructions. Strange to think that she and Elida had worked together then, bringing Morgaze to heel. She had to take hold of herself. She was in a daze, thinking of everything except what she needed to. Concentrate. This is no time to panic. You must send him away, or kill him. She knew it for a mistake while the words were still leaving her mouth, all too full of urgency. Even the warders looked at her, and the Aes Sedai. She had never before known what it felt like for someone who lacked the power to have those eyes turned on them at full strength. She felt naked, her very mind laid bare. Even knowing that Aes Sedai could not read thoughts, she still wanted to confess before they listed her lies and crimes. She hoped that her face was not like Lyanna's, red-cheeked and wide-eyed. You know why he is here. Sheriam's voice was calmly certain. Both of you do, and you do not want to confront him. Enough so that you would have us kill him for you. There do be few great captains living. Newell marked them off on gauntleted fingers. Agelmar Jagad and Davram Bashir will no leave the Blight, I think. And Pedro Nile will surely no be of use to you. If Rodel Ituralda do be alive, he do be mired somewhere in what do remain of Arad Duman. He raised his thick thumb. And that do leave Gareth Bryn. Do you think that we will need a great captain then? Sheriam asked quietly. Newell and Arenvar did not look at one another, but Swan still had the feeling that they had exchanged glances. It is your decision, Sheriam, Arenvar replied just as quietly. Yours and the other sisters. But if you mean to return to the tower, we could use him. If you intend to remain here until Elida sends for you, then not. Mirel gazed at Newell questioningly, and he nodded. It seems that you were right, Swan, Anaya said wryly. We have not fooled the Gaidin. The question is whether he will agree to serve us, Carlinia said, and Morvrin nodded, adding, We must make him see our cause in such a way that he wishes to serve. It will not help us if it becomes known that we killed or imprisoned so notable a man before we have even begun. Yes, Baonin said, and we must offer him the rewards that will bind him to us firmly. Sheriam turned her eyes on the two men. When Lord Bryn reaches the village, tell him nothing but bring him to us. As soon as the door closed behind the warders, her gaze firmed. Swan recognized it. The same clear green stare that had Novice's knees knocking before a word was said. Now, you will tell us exactly why Gareth Bryn is here. There was no choice. If they caught her in even the tiniest lie, they would begin to question everything. Swan took a deep breath. We took shelter for the night in a barn near Core Springs in Andor. Bryn is the lord there, and...
Chapter 28. Trapped. A warder in a gray-green coat approached Bryn as soon as he rode Traveler past the first stone houses of the village. Bryn would have known the man for a warder after watching him walk 2 strides, even without all the Aes Sedai faces staring at him in the street. What in the name of light were so many Aes Sedai doing this close to Amadicia? Rumor in villages behind said Elrond meant to claim this bank of the river Eldar, which meant the White Cloaks did. Aes Sedai could defend themselves well, but if Nile sent a legion across the Eldar, a good many of these women would die. Unless he could no longer tell how long a stump had been exposed to where this place had been buried in the forest 2 months ago. What had Mara gotten herself into? He was sure he would find her here. Village men remembered 3 pretty young women traveling together, especially when one of them asked directions to a town abandoned since the White Cloak War. The warder, a big man with a broad face and illy honored by his beard, planted himself in the street in front of Bryn's big-nosed bay gelding and bowed. Lord Bryn, I am Newell Drummond. If you will come with me, There are those who do wish to speak with you. Bryn dismounted slowly, pulling off his gauntlets and tucking them behind his sword belt as he studied the town. The plain buff-colored coat he wore now was much better for a journey of this sort than the gray silk he had started in. That he had given away. Aes Sedai and warders and others watched him silently. But even those who had to be servants did not look surprised. And Drummond knew his name. His face was not...
Excuse me. Alright, everyone, probably got caught into this life for tonight. Be back on again tomorrow. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone who continues to stop by, showing the support. We appreciate all y'all. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.